VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk. And good afternoon. This is Gordon Morris sitting in for Vic Eliason for a special edition of Crosstalk today. You're going to be hearing the voice of a man whose voice is not unfamiliar, but normally you hear his voice almost in sound bites. He's Dr. John Morris, the president of the Institute for Creation Research, now located in the state of Texas. And we usually hear him on little one-minute features, even during our Crosstalk program, called Back to Genesis. And he also appears occasionally on the Institute for Creation Research 15-minute program called Science, Scripture, and Salvation. But Dr. Morris is well prepared to give much longer messages, as he has a long history of training and experience in the area of creation. He has a doctorate in Geological Engineering. And since joining the Institute for Creation Research, he's been a professor in the ICR Graduate School and has also written a number of books and articles on the topic of evolution and creation. He has headed expeditions to such places as Mount Ararat in a search for Noah's Ark. Well, Dr. John Morris spoke at a VCY America rally in suburban Milwaukee in 2010. And we'll be hearing portions of that message on today's program. The message, The Fossil Record, a Problem for Evolutionists. And John Morris has a very positive viewpoint as to who's winning in the battle for creation or evolution. Here's the first portion of that message now by Dr. John Morris on the fossil record, a problem for evolutionists.
You know, fossils are thought to be the proof of evolution. If you ask an evolutionist, where's the proof of evolution? They'll likely say in the fossil record. There's where you see the record of one type of life changing into another. And they think that evolution has been proven, and the fossils do so. But you know, we've been studying the fossils, and the fossils don't do that at all. In fact, the fossils, near as I can tell, disprove evolution. It just goes against it so strongly that this is one area that we are winning. I mean, we are winning. If this is two worldviews at war with one another, on the fossil record, we win. And I want to declare that victory tonight and show you just how we are winning and put it all together. In fact, I'm going to show you about fossils probably more than you want to know, okay? Well, let's try. Let's see. It worked. It worked. The fossil record, a problem for evolutionists. Well, I know enough about speaking to know that you got to start with a joke, right? Well, here they are in the classroom, a little young boy talking to the teacher. She says, yeah, I'll grant you that to begin with, evolution was just a theory, but it evolved into a fact a long time ago. And isn't that the way it is? Little Johnny, evolution is a fact. In fact, little Johnny, you are a product of evolution, that you came from the animals. In fact, you're an animal yourself. And I'm going to train you like Pavlov trained his dogs. And that's what evolution is all about. That's a worldview of evolution. And it is taught in our classrooms as if it were true, but it's not true. Evolution didn't happen, and the fossil record shows that it didn't happen. Let me show you about that fossil record. The fossil record, it's not a record. A record really is a written document. That's what a record is. But the fossil record is a term that we've all heard. And, well, let's see what the fossil record does tell us. Well, evolutionists, when they present the fossils, they present it along Darwin's tree of life. The tree of life shows that all of life goes back to a common ancestor, that we're all related through the trunks and the branches and the twigs and stuff. All of life goes to a common ancestor. All of life is related. It's also represented by the geologic column. In fact, you need to understand the geologic column in order to understand the fossils, because the geologic column, it's thought to be a column of time, really, from long ago past at the bottom of the column up to the present. In fact, if you see the fossils up here at the present, these are things that live today, some of them, and then that have lived more recently according to evolution. But you go down farther and farther down in the fossil record, you get to the dinosaurs. And you keep going, you get before the dinosaurs. See, this is a column of time. It's presented as if it were a column of fossils, but it is really a statement of the way evolutionists think about things. The fossils look very different from this. This is presented in almost every textbook as if it were true, but it's really not the way the fossil record is. Evolution says we're all related, but the creation model says that we're separate, that God has created the various categories of animals. The Bible calls them the different kinds of animals. As that kind, and when he created that kind, they appeared just as that kind. They did not descend from another animal of a different kind. Now, once that kind got here, like the dogs. I mean, the dogs are not cats, but they say dogs and cats came from a common ancestor. But dogs are here and cats are here. The common ancestor is not here. It's thought to be a missing link. By the way, you know what a missing link is, don't you? You don't, huh? I don't either. Nobody knows what a missing link is. You know why? It's because it's missing. For crying in the bucket, it's missing. It's just not there. Evolution depends on trillions of missing links. They've never found any of them. A missing link is missing. The missing link between dogs and cats are, well, dogs and cats are somewhat alike, but dogs and horses are less alike, but there's a missing link between them too. And the missing links are missing. I mean, how do we know they're missing? How do we know they ever existed? I think they didn't. God created dogs and God created horses, and once they were here, they could vary and change quite a bit. There's a lot of variety among the dogs and the horses and people. There's a lot of variety, but dogs are not horses. And, well, the creation model could be defined as the model of sudden appearance. That when dogs appeared, they didn't get here by the slow and steady evolutionary transformation of one into another, but they appeared suddenly as dogs. And once they were here, they could vary. By the way, if whenever an evolutionist gives you evidence of evolution, he will always talk about the variety of dogs. But I got to tell you, dogs is dogs. I mean, dogs is not cats. And dogs didn't come from cats, and they didn't come from a common ancestor. There's no evidence at all that dogs came from some non-dog ancestor. Dogs vary. We don't doubt that. We know that. But dogs remain dogs. So the creation model is this idea of sudden appearance, and then another term that's in science is called stasis. It's like stationary. It's static. It doesn't go anywhere. It stays the same. That's what stasis is. They stay dogs. They may vary somewhat, but they stay dogs. That's stasis. Remember those terms. That's the definition of creation. A sudden appearance, and once they were here, they stayed that way. Got it? Many varieties can come from a single kind, but one kind never becomes a different kind, as required by evolution. Stasis is the rule of the day. Evolution, this descent from a common ancestor idea, I think it's more of an idea about who we are than where we came from. Little Johnny, you came from the animals. Little Johnny, you're an animal. In fact, here's a quote from a textbook. Little Johnny, you are an animal, and you share a common heritage with earthworms. This is in a textbook that we pay so that little Johnny can go and learn this. I got to ask you, does little Johnny need to know this? Does this help anything? Here's another one. Little Johnny, we belong to a highly specialized group of bony fishes. We are fishes, whether we like it or not. You see, fishes are the first animal with a vertebrate, with a backbone, Well, we have a backbone. We're vertebrates also. They class us as vertebrates. So the fishes were the first vertebrates, so we are just a category of fish. Little Johnny. I mean, this just doesn't do little Johnny any good. And by the way, if little Johnny is taught this, does he value human life like he should? You see, there are consequences to this worldview. To an extent, to a great extent, they base all this on the fossil record. Well, I think they shouldn't. Remember that we all have the same fossil record. We have the same data, the same facts. We have the same fossils. We have the same rocks. We all have the same data, both creationists and evolutionists. It's just that when we study the fossils and the rocks, we come to different interpretations of it. Interpretation A or interpretation B, two scientists studying the same evidence come to such different conclusions. The reason we come to such different conclusions is that we start the study from a different assumption set, from a different set of presuppositions, from a different worldview. I'm convinced if you start the study of the evidence from the assumption that there is no God, that there is no supernatural at work in the world, and then, well, you can look at the rocks and fossils and tell an evolutionary story about them, about their history. You see, fossils, animals don't change much. They vary some, but they don't change. They're stasis. This is what we see. Everywhere we look, we see stasis. Evolutionists tell a story about these major changes, but we see stasis. We don't see these major changes. They tell the story about fish becoming people, but we don't see anything of the sort. So this is really evolution is really a worldview about history. It's not really science, because science observes stasis. This history tells about big changes. That's not a part of science. They couch it as if it were science, but I think this is just a worldview. I think it's a religious worldview. It's an anti-Christian worldview taught in the name of science. Evolution is the naturalistic worldview. The idea that there is no God interprets the evidence and comes out with that history. But if you start with a different set of presuppositions, the idea that there is a God that has been involved in the world around us, and then we look at the world, the data, the rocks and fossils, we can tell a different story about them, a different interpretation. But both of us are trying to reconstruct history. Both evolution and creation are historical reconstructions. They're ideas about history. Well, the creation idea does have an eyewitness. Evolution doesn't have any eyewitness. We have an eyewitness who wrote a record, and he's an accurate observer and a truthful writer, and we can believe what he says. That's the Bible. But, well, he didn't give us all the details. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of science to be done.
We're listening to Dr. John Morris speaking on the fossil record, a problem for evolutionists, a message presented at a VCY America rally. We'll continue with the next portion of this message in just a moment as we continue with Crosstalk here on VCY America.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, do you believe in the theory of evolution?
Chris, I don't believe in the theory of evolution, but you've asked the question right. One can believe in evolution, but they certainly can't know it to be true. To know something, you have to see it happen or see evidence that it did happen. But evolution doesn't happen today. And if it ever went on in the past, it's either going so slow today that we can't see it, or it's stopped. There's also no evidence that it could happen. The conditions and natural laws are all wrong. Furthermore, when we look at the fossil record, we don't see any evidence that it did happen in the past. There's just no evidence for it. Yes, Chris, some people do believe in evolution, but I got to tell you, it takes a lot more faith to believe in evolution, an idea without real scientific evidence, than it does to believe in creation, backed up by much observational evidence. The Back to Genesis truth wins again.
This is Chris O'Brien. Thanks for going back to Genesis.
Welcome back to today's special edition of Crosstalk. Gordon Morris sitting in for Vic Eliason today with a message by Dr. John Morris. No relation, by the way. Dr. Morris is president of the Institute for Creation Research and is bringing a message originally presented at a VCY America rally in 2010. It's about the fossil record and how Dr. Morris says it's actually a problem for evolutionists. Now, the complete message is far too long for today's program. So later on, we will be giving information on how you can obtain the entire message in either audio or video form. The video would also include the visuals, which are displayed on a large screen at that rally to accompany his message. More on that a bit later. Right now, it's back to the next portion of this message by Dr. John Morris on the fossil record, a problem for evolutionists.
I clearly believe in creation. I believe that this way of thinking is correct. But I can't prove this to you in a rigorous scientific sense, because in order to do that, I'd have to go back in history and observe it. Science is all about observation. That's the scientific method, is to observe it. And we can't do that. We can't go back in history. Neither creation nor evolution is happening today. These are ideas about history. If we don't allow the Bible as evidence, if we stay with the science, well, these are worldviews about history. But while I can't prove this or I can't disprove this in a rigorous sense, we can compare the two, and when you do, it's this worldview that works. This is the one that handles the evidence, that explains it best. This is the one that clearly is superior to this one. And so that's how we're handling the fossil record at this point. Perhaps fossils are the best test case for creation evolution. Evolutionists think about the fossils. This is what they think. They think that the fossils are the remains of animals which lived in the past. They evolved by natural processes and were buried and fossilized in watery sediments over great ages. That's what they think about the fossils. Well, the creationists have a different view of the fossils. They think that the fossils are remains of animals who descended from the animals that were created by God, and that these animals were buried and fossilized in these watery sediments. They were buried rapidly by the watery action of the great flood of Noah's day. And it wasn't over great ages. It was the watery episode of Noah's flood that laid down the rocks, and these sediments, like sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock is sediments that have hardened into sedimentary rock, and those sediments were full of dead things that drowned in that flood, and they were buried, and they have fossilized. And now we study the rocks and fossils. They are the results of Noah's flood. So we both have the same fossils. It's just that they tell a different story about it. Their story is a naturalistic story. This is based clearly on the inerrant Word of God. Fossils. What do you do with the fossils? Fossils are bits and pieces of dead things. In evolution, they say that the fossils document the idea that each type descended through ancestral types through what we call transitional forms. If a fish became a person, or say a fish became an amphibian, which is the next step. If a fish became an amphibian, there would be a lot of steps between a fish and an amphibian. These are the transitional steps, and some of these transitions would be documented as fossils. We should find, according to evolution, the transitional forms as fossils. We should find that. But if creation is true, then each type was created separately and fully formed, appeared suddenly as basically its stasis since then. And these transitional forms were never involved in their origin, and we will never find any transitional forms because they didn't exist. Over the decades past, creationists have pointed this out a lot. And we point out that there are no transitional forms that document evolution. This is not very hard to show from the fossil record. Even evolutionists understand this. They believe this because the fossil record don't show any transitional forms. And to just document that fact is a very powerful thing. But I just wonder what the fossils are saying. The fossil record is we're showing that they don't show evolution, but what are they showing? If evolution is true, we ought to see this kind of transition. If this fish changed into an amphibian, this is the most amphibian-like fish. That's a cryptorhynchian fish. And this is the most fish-like amphibian. It's a labyrinthodont amphibian. I mean, these are very different, but this is the most fish-like amphibian. That's the most amphibian-like fish. As you go up the geologic column, as you go up the layers of strata, you'll see this fish becoming more and more amphibian-like and growing legs, and finally legs that are good enough to walk on. You should see that. But I suspect, I know you just don't see that. There's labyrinthodont amphibian, there's a cryptorhynchian fish. I've practiced those words. They don't just roll off your tongue. But if you really look at those, I mean, this particular fish does have a few chips of bone out in its fin. It's not a leg, it's not even bone, it's cartilage. But there are a few little chips out here in the fin, which they say evolved into the leg of the amphibian, the leg and foot. But you know, if you look closely, there's the foot or the hand of the amphibian, and there's the fin of the fish. Now, this is as close as it gets in evolution. This is as close as it gets. And there's a lot of difference between those two, aren't there? I mean, these are next-door neighbors. There's no transitions between here. This is a fish. That's an amphibian. And nothing in between. In fact, if you were to take the two, here's the amphibian, and cross-section it so that you could see the backbone. See, the fish has a backbone too. So they're both vertebrates. But this vertebrate has a pelvic region or a shoulder that then connects the backbone with the legs, allowing him to stand. These bones in the fish's fin are not connected to the backbone, and he can't stand. He uses them to steer and to swim, but not to stand. Like I say, this is as close as it gets. This is a close, according to evolution, these are next door neighbors. But they're very different. There should be a lot of missing links in between there, and there's not. I got to tell you, the only place you're ever going to see an amphibian growing legs, a fish growing legs and about to become an amphibian. Well, here's a quote from an evolutionist. They admit we have no intermediate fossils between the rhipidistриan fish and the early amphibians. We have no intermediate fossils. Bingo. We have no intermediate fossils. No means zero. The only place you're ever going to find a fish growing legs, well, let me show you the only known transitional forms. This is the only known transitional form. I want to be fair. I'm going to show you the transitional forms. This is the only known transitional form. That's it. There are none. The only place you're ever going to see a fish growing legs is on the bumper of somebody's car. But thankfully, survival of the fittest does work. Stephen Jay Gould, who until he passed away a couple years ago was the leading evolutionary spokesperson. He was number one. He was the authority on evolution that everybody went to. He was chairman of the department at Harvard University, Stephen Jay Gould. But he was an expert on the fossil record. That's what his PhD was in. He admitted, he was a good scientist. I love to read his articles. He's just a very good scientist. But he was a thoroughgoing atheist and Marxist. He just didn't believe in creation at all. He hated creation. But he admitted the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record. They are rare indeed. There are none. Persist as the trade secret of paleontology, the study of the fossil record. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, but not the evidence of fossils. The evolutionary tree has the branches and the trunk. What he's saying is that the tree looks like this, but the fossils really looks like this. That these things, there's some variety, but they're not connected. All of these are separate. You know, this is what the Bible's been saying, that each of these types are separate and distinct. They vary once they're here, but they stay that type. The fossils look very different from the evolutionary story. He goes on to say, this is a quote from that article, the history of most fossil species includes two features which are inconsistent with gradual evolution. One, that the fossil record shows, this is an atheist talking here, an expert on the fossil record. The fossil record shows stasis. Most species exhibit no directional change during their tenure on Earth. They appear in the fossil record looking much the same as when they disappear. Basic body style change is usually limited and directionless. And two, the fossil record shows sudden appearance. I mean, have you ever heard those two words, sudden appearance and stasis, before? Guys, that's the definition of creation. I'm telling you, we're winning. We're winning. The evolutionists are admitting that this is the way it is. Stephen Gould continues. He says, all experts on the fossil record know that the fossil record contains precious little in the way of intermediate forms. Transitions between major groups are characteristically abrupt. He says, but even though we have no direct evidence for smooth transitions, can we invent a reasonable sequence of intermediate forms? That is, transitional forms, all of them viable and functioning between ancestors and descendants? He says, I don't think so. Of what possible use are the imperfect incipient stages of useful structures? What good is half a wing or half a jaw or half a leg? As you're changing your fin into your leg, what good is half a leg? I mean, he's a thoroughgoing evolutionist, leading evolutionist, but he can't even invent them.
Dr. John Morris, president of the Institute for Creation Research, speaking at a recent VCY America rally on the fossil record, a problem for evolutionists. And he goes on to give more examples of how ridiculous some of the claims of evolution are, especially as they relate to fossils. We'll be continuing on our Crosstalk program with the next portion of that message in just a moment. We'll be bringing you information also on how you may obtain the entire message in either audio or video form. This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Most people devote much time researching and investigating important issues before making a decision or reaching a conclusion. Yet when faced with the most important issue of their earthly life, where will I spend eternity, they appear to be unconcerned or disinterested. Since God does not promise anyone tomorrow, and man's eternal destiny is sealed at death, would it not be wise to investigate these things? That's the purpose of the book, Preparing for Eternity, in which author Mike Gendron contrasts the truth of God's Word with the teachings and traditions he was taught for over 30 years in the Roman Catholic Church. He found that eternal life is not merited by good works, but is given freely by God's grace to those who put their faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ as their all-sufficient Savior. The book, Preparing for Eternity, is available for a donation of $17 or more to VCY America by calling 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829. Welcome back to today's special edition of Crosstalk. We're hearing portions of a message by Dr. John Morris of the Institute for Creation Research at a VCY rally in 2010 on the fossil record, a problem for evolution. As we've been mentioning, this message is too long to hear the entire message on today's Crosstalk program, but it can be obtained in either audio or video form. And if you order today's Crosstalk program, you'll actually receive the CD of the entire message from that rally. You can also order specifically the message from that rally in either CD or DVD form. The DVD, of course, is video, and you'll be able to see the pictures and graphics that Dr. Morris was showing to the audience during that message in the auditorium. To obtain either the CD or the DVD of this rally message, call us during regular office hours at 1-800-729-9829. Simply ask for today's Crosstalk by name if you want the CD, or simply say you'd like a CD or a DVD of the rally with Dr. John Morris, the John Morris Rally on the fossil record. And you can obtain either or both the audio or video form. You can also go to our website at crosstalkamerica.com, go to the Crosstalk store and search for John Morris or the fossil record under rallies, and you can also order either the DVD or the CD online. The website address is crosstalkamerica.com. Just go to the Crosstalk store. And again, the number to call during office hours is 1-800-729-9829. Now another portion of that message by Dr. John Morris on the fossil record, a problem for evolution.
You know, when they talk about the evolution of birds from reptiles, that's kind of what they talk about a lot. There's two different theories. One is the tree down theory, that some crawling reptiles, lizards-like things, crawled up a tree and some of them slipped out or jumped out and fell down and splat there on the ground. And they died. But over the millions of years, a lot of them crawled up there and some of them fell down. But some of them had mutations, and with their legs were a little bit thicker and flappier than the others. And one of them didn't die. And, well, he didn't die, but he had babies, and some of those babies had mutations, and over the time, they got more and more flappy arms and more frayed arms, and finally one of them had flappier arms enough to where when they fell out of the tree, they just kind of glided to the ground. And over the millions of years, sooner or later, one of them glided down and just I can fly a little bit. And they flew a little bit more. And this is the tree down theory. There's another theory, the ground up theory. And that is, well, these are diagrams I took out of Scientific American. I mean, it's their diagram. This is their illustration of their imaginary story. The idea is that this walking reptile, well, reptiles, a lot of them eat bugs, and this one was running around trying to catch bugs, but those particular reptiles that had flappier arms could catch more bugs. And they got more and more flappy arms, and over the millions of years got more and more flappy arms. They could catch more and more bugs, and as they were catching, one day they just flew away. That's the ground up theory. They tell stories. They substitute stories for evidence because there is no evidence for this kind of thing. But this is the one they believe nowadays. They've kind of given up on the tree down theory. Now they're from the ground up theory. They think it was a dinosaur that grew wings and flew off. That's what they think. In fact, it was a dinosaur like T-Rex. What can you say? Here's another evolutionist, Stephen Stanley, famous evolutionist. He says he's an expert on the fossil record. The known fossil record fails to document a single example of basic body style evolution, accomplishing a major body style transition. It fails to give us a single example. If you fail to give a single example, how many do you have? Zero. And this proves evolution? I got another idea. I got another historical reconstruction. Well, as Jim mentioned a minute ago, I'm finishing up a book on the fossil record. Now, I'm not a fossil expert. I'm a geologist, and so I know something about finding fossils. I know something about fossils, but I found out that to really get into fossils, you got to know biology, and I don't know biology real well. But I've learned a lot of biology through this, and I begin to ask the question, if the fossil record doesn't document evolution, then what does it document? What is the fossil record recording and trying to tell us? Remember the geologic column. Remember that this is the present, this is the past, this is the long ago past, this is the origin of life down here from non-life. These things evolved first, and then that, and then that, and fish, and dinosaurs, and mammals, and people. As you come up time. This is the present, that's the long ago past. So remember the geologic column. We're going to need that. I don't buy this geologic column. I think this is wrong. There is an order to the geologic column, to the fossil record, but it is not this order. This is a lie. I don't know how to say it other than that. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. And yet there is a bit of an order to the fossils. But let's talk. Down here at the bottom, this layer down here, the Cambrian strata, obviously this layer was laid down before this layer. I mean, the pancake on the bottom of the plate, it was the first pancake, and then the other pancakes laid on top of it, obviously. Well, these came before these, even if they all came in 1 year, is what I think. There's just not much time represented here, but this is an order, and this came in general before that, and before that, and before that. But this Cambrian period is the first pancake layer that contains abundant multicellular fossils. And these fossils are quite abundant, and there are of all sorts of different animals, so much so that they call it the Cambrian explosion of life. Mostly it's marine invertebrates. Marine invertebrates, animals without a backbone, like starfish and coral and jellyfish and clams, and a lot of clams, just millions and millions and trillions of clams, just clams everywhere. Clams and trilobites, just a lot of clams. Well, fish are in that bottom layer too, they're in the Cambrian explosion. Vertebrate fish, and we're vertebrates too. So every basic body style is in that Cambrian layer. Let me repeat that. Every basic body style is in that lowest layer. The one they say is the oldest. Lowest is the oldest. And every one of them is there. A Cambrian explosion of life. When they talk about the different phyla of life, that's the basic body styles. I mean, these are all basic body styles, and they're all different. I think there's about 60 different phyla, and they're all in that early Cambrian explosion. I mean, in fact, here's an evolutionary quote. He says, it's considered likely that since all these animal phyla became, they're found in the Cambrian explosion, it's likely that they became distinct before or during the Cambrian time. For they appear fully formed without any intermediates connecting one to the other. They're just separate, bingo and bingo and bingo, and they're all separate and perfectly formed, and there they are. If evolution were true, it seems like there'd be one, and then that would branch off, and they'd become more and more, and now we'd have 60 or so up here. But no, what you have is 60 or so at the start, and they're either still living today or some of them have gone extinct. This is time up this way. This is the number of basic body styles. This is the way it is. This is the way evolution's story goes. The evolutionary story just doesn't make sense of the evidence. It doesn't accurately represent the evidence. One of those very famous fossils is called a trilobite. They have a lot of trilobites around here, or I know they have a lot of them in Chicago and that area down in there. Trilobites, they're a wonderful fossil, but trilobites are, they're in that lowest level. They're in a lot of levels, but they're in the lowest level. And evolution says that starts off simple and gets more and more complex until you finally get up to man. Simple to complex, amoeba to man. But those trilobites down there at the bottom, they are very complex. They are as complex as things alive today. In fact, the eyeball of the trilobite, the eye has even been fossilized. I mean, there's lots of trilobites. But the eye, when that's fossilized, the eye looks like this. This is called a complex lens. There is no eye on planet Earth today that it is as complex as this. This eye is at the bottom. It just seems like it just goes contrary, opposite of evolution. It starts complex, it stays complex. Those trilobites, well, they do appear to be extinct now. But extinction is, well, that's not evolution. It's the opposite of evolution. That's what we see is the opposite of evolution. It's not that we just don't see evolution. We see the opposite of evolution. Because there's a lot of things going extinct even today. But nothing new is coming into existence, as evolution says happens over time. We only see extinction. Here's this evolutionist that says, well, the fossil record has always been a problem. Why? Because the fossil record has always shown the absence of transitional forms and the abrupt appearance of complex life. We're winning, guys. We're winning. This is what creation insists on, and that's what the fossil record shows. The fossil records show abrupt appearance. By that I mean, as you come up the fossil record, there will be one form that, well, maybe it's similar, like this fish. There are fish below this, but not this kind of fish. This is a paddlefish. And suddenly this paddlefish gets here about 300 million years ago, so they say. I don't like the number, but this is their number. When that paddlefish appears, it's fully a paddlefish. It's just like the paddlefish that exists today out here in the Great Lakes. Suddenly you have paddlefish, and they're still alive. It's just, where is the evolution?
We're continuing to listen to portions of a message by Dr. John Morris, president of the Institute for Creation Research, speaking on the fossil record, a problem for evolutionists. He's detailing problem after problem when you look at the fossil evidence. We have one more segment in our program to bring you one more portion of that message. Again, for information on obtaining the entire message in either video or audio form, call us during regular office hours at 1-800-729-9829. This is Crosstalk on VCY America.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. Today, number 19 on our list of 20 characteristics of false teachers embraced by the false church. Number 19 is false teachers can be a test from God to our faithfulness and to reveal true and false converts. Deuteronomy 13 verse 3 speaks to this. You should not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Isn't that something? Today, as we see the proliferation of false teachers, false prophets, false apostles, and many are following them. But you know what? John, the book of John, tells us, John chapter 10, verses 4 through 5, that true believers don't follow false teachers and false shepherds. So really, false teachers can be a test from God to test our faithfulness as well as to reveal false converts. For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House.
And welcome back to the final portion of today's special edition of Crosstalk. We're hearing a message by Dr. John Morris, the president of the Institute for Creation Research, on the fossil record, a problem for evolution. And again, the entire message can be obtained by ordering today's Crosstalk program as a CD, or you may also order the rally message itself in either CD or DVD form. The DVD giving you the video portion of the message as well, including the pictures shown to the audience in the auditorium. Simply call us during regular office hours at 1-800-729-9829 and ask for the John Morris Rally on the fossil record. That's 1-800-729-9829. Or go to our website, crosstalkamerica.com, and go to the Crosstalk store and search for John Morris or the fossil record under rallies. Now the final portion of the message that we have time for today with Dr. John Morris and the fossil record, a problem for evolution.
Here's an interesting, more stasis. Here's a clam fossil. Clams. There's just a lot of clams in the fossil record. Just a lot of clams. I mean, there's clams everywhere. Clams. But this looks just like a modern clam. They say it's 100 million years old. I found this down in Texas, in a strata that's thought to be 100 million years old. But that layer, that pancake layer, covers most of Texas. That's a big layer. But it also covers Oklahoma. And it covers Arkansas, and it covers Louisiana, and it covers Mississippi, and it covers Alabama, and it covers Georgia, and South Carolina, and Florida, and the Gulf of Mexico. It's a huge semi-continental layer of clams. It's just a layer of clams. And they look like clams. They haven't changed a lick in 100 million years. As it turns out, the real fossil record is very different from what you see in that geologic column. The real fossil record, believe it or not, is 95% marine invertebrates, mostly shellfish like clams. Just clams. I mean, just clams. 95% of all fossils are marine invertebrates. Of the 5% that's left, most of them are plants. Of the little bit that's left, most of them are fish. Of the little tiny bit that's left, well, that's insects. Of the little tiny bit that's left, well, much less than 1% are land vertebrates. And evolutionists make their case off of land vertebrates. In fact, they drew that column, and over half of the figures that they drew in that column were land vertebrates. That's why I say the fossil record is very different from that. The fossil record is a record of clams, just clams. A lot of clam varieties, but clams, just clams. And, well, that includes all the dinosaur fossils, all the amphibian fossils, all the mammal fossils, all the people fossils. That's just a little bitty tiny bit. And there's hardly any record at all of land animals in the fossil record. Now, in the flood, a lot of land animals died. The Bible speaks of them. But in water, land mammals float. They float. I think sharks were having a feeding frenzy the whole year of the flood. In order to bury a floating, bloated animal, you somehow got to get it to the bottom of the water. That's where all the geologic action's going on. There's hardly any continent-based animals, but these marine fossils are all on the continents. They're all in Kansas. There are almost no marine animals in the ocean. They're all on the land. For whatever it's worth, it tells you that something very different was going on in the past. Something out of our expectation. This fossil is kind of interesting. It's got an ammonite in here. But this was found on top of Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world. Marine fossil on top of the mountain? What? Well, I got to quit. These layers, sometimes you find one fossil that extends through many layers. Just totally destroys the whole idea of the geologic column. The fossils disprove it. And there are some anomalous fossils, even human artifacts found in these layers all up and down. They're rare, but they do exist. I mean, this one's found in coal in Pennsylvania. Wood petrified. Petrified wood is no big deal, but this is petrified fence post. A farmer put his fence out there and it petrified. Well, here, this one. It's a cowboy boot. This boot, we know, this kind of boot was made in 1950 or so. So sometimes after that, this guy was evidently murdered and buried out there in Texas. When they found him, they found what's left of his legs. That's his leg that's been fossilized. It's been calcified. We call this guy the limestone cowboy. Well, the main point is the fossil record doesn't show evolution. It shows the sudden appearance of basic types. It shows stasis of those types. It shows complexity at the start. It shows extinction, not evolution. Doesn't show any transitional forms. All of these phyla are present at the start. The fossils are found throughout the column. It doesn't show evolution at all. Most of the fossils are marine animals. They're found in catastrophic deposits, indications of violent death, mixed habitats, and these fossils are found only on the continents. The fossils are exactly what they should be if Noah's flood is the causative agent. It's not at all what they should be if evolution in a long time took place. But the point is, guys, we're winning. We are winning, and the fossil record is a major point in documenting the fact that we're winning. The Christian worldview is the one that works.
Dr. John Morris of the Institute for Creation Research, his message, The Fossil Record, a Problem for Evolutionists. The entire message available on CD by ordering today's Crosstalk program or ordering the rally with Dr. John Morris on the fossil record. Also video versions of this message available on DVD, and they can all be obtained by calling us at 1-800-729-9829 during regular office hours. Or go to our website, crosstalkamerica.com, go to the Crosstalk store, and search for the rally by John Morris on the fossil record. This is Gordon Morris, sitting in for Vic Eliason. Thank you for joining us for today's special edition of Crosstalk. You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the Internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.